All right, welcome back, everybody. So, we are going to be starting on the Tang Dynasty. We'll talk about the song, the amazing accomplishments of both, and then we'll get a little into Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. So, we're going to look at the Tang Dynasty to start. And the Tang do things a little differently. And one of the major themes of what we're going to be looking at is Buddhism. So first, the Tang do use the Confucian administrative system. They reform the exam system, though, and they establish the Tang Code, which is a legal system. They reorganize the government. And as you can see, bureaucracy is the name of the game. Emperor. And beneath the emperor, you have military affairs, council of state, the censorate, and so on and so forth, and down it goes. And this is going to become a model that many other empires and many nation states are going to look at when they're establishing governments. Bureaucracy, right here. Now, the Tang were a very liberal government. Again, we need to look at this by the times. They were very liberal for the times. They were very, very tolerant of all religions. And this is especially seen by Empress Wu. Now, Empress Wu, she overthrows the rightful emperor and rules in her own right. But she's also the only woman in all of Chinese history who rules as an empress in her own right. And she fought tooth and nail for that, literally. She had the rightful emperor killed and then took his place. And I do believe that was her nephew. And eventually she'll have to abdicate due to old age in her mid-80s. Now, Empress Wu was a very passionate patron of Buddhism. Under Empress Wu, numerous Buddhist monasteries were established. They were built and they became very powerful. And a lot of people began flocking to these monasteries. But here's the thing, guys. As more and more people were turning to Buddhism, that means they're turning away from Confucianism. And one of the most powerful values in Confucianism is not only filial piety, but it's also ancestor veneration. And in Buddhism, when you're a devout Buddhist, you left society and you moved into either a Buddhist monastery or a nunnery. And what that means is you're not getting married, you're not having children, you are not working the fields and contributing to society. In Confucianism, peasants were seen as the backbone of society. Yeah, they're peasants, but they're also respected for the fact that they're growing the food that is feeding the masses. And in Buddhism, people were leaving. They were going to these monasteries, so they're not contributing to the greater good or to society. They're not having children, which means there's no ancestor veneration occurring. And what Buddhism taught really conflicted with traditional Confucian values. So what happens is in the late 9th century, an edict on Buddhism is written, and essentially the Tang Empire cracks down and breaks the power of these Buddhist monasteries, and they're shutting them down by the hundreds, and they're taking this land back. Because here's the other thing, guys. When people are living in these monasteries, they're not paying taxes. So the government was also losing a lot of money. And when the Tang Empire breaks the power of Buddhism, they reassert those traditional Confucian values. And this is not just one emperor doing this. Han Yu becomes a very outspoken figure. He's a Confucian scholar, and he is saying, no. Buddhism is wrong. Buddhism is bad. He writes the Bone on Buddha, and essentially it's everything that is wrong with Buddhism and why it's severely hurting society. So this is really where you see the downfall of Buddhism in China and the rise of Confucianism. Now, what I want you to do is pause the PowerPoint for just a minute and take a look. These are the 3 major schools of Buddhism. So there's Theravada, which is the original form of Buddhism. You have Mahayana, which means great vehicle. And then you have Tibetan Buddhism. And these are the three that College Board really wants you to focus on. Now, there are other schools of Buddhism as well, but these are your top three. So what I want you to do is just pause, take a minute, study these. And if you have any questions, we will be looking at these again in class. All right, I'm assuming you've unpaused it now, and I'm going to keep going. If you haven't, again, pause, and we'll keep going. Under the Tang, a rapid increase in rice production. Now, guys, I don't know if you know this or not, but rice yields more crop per acre than any other crop in the world. So you get more results with 1 acre of rice, and this is going to lead to a massive population boom. The Tang is also going to open up trade with Vietnam, and they're going to be trading for champa rice. And we'll talk about that when we get to Vietnam. This is also a reason why the population booms. In addition, terrace farming, which is essentially you have layers is not the right term, but you essentially have downward steps. So you can actually not only farm more land, but it's actually a better way to farm this rice. And again, population doubles. So you're going to have urbanization. And the power is going to transition from north to south. Again, well, that makes sense. Geographic location, closer to Vietnam for the rice. And under the Tang, the Silk Road will also be revived. So obviously, during this warring states period, with the Zhou, you see trade halt. We talked about that in our last podcast. But with the collapse of the Han, you have the period of chaos. Trade's going to collapse again, but it's revitalized, and the Tang bring it back. Yes, the Sui started, but the Tang really push it. Now, the Tang were the contemporaries of the Umayyad and the Abbasid caliphates. And this is really where you see a golden age of innovation, of learning, and of trading between numerous empires. So Chang'an was capital, and it's considered the metropolis of East Asia. It's the destination for ambassadors from other states who are sent to China under what's called the tributary system, meaning they pay tribute in the form of money, gold, goods. It's for protection, and it's to honor China's superiority over them. And the city had over 1 million people living in it, which was quite the accomplishment for the time. You have this city as the best place to be learning in East Asia, and it is comparable with the cities of Damascus and Baghdad. The city is the intellectual and commercial center, so people from all over the world were coming to learn, to study. You have merchants and traders, a very diverse population, and there's a lot of culture flowing in and flowing out. The Tang would eventually be overtaken by the Song Dynasty. They are never politically powerful. They're eventually conquered by the Mongols, and yes, we will talk about that. But the Song are known for their advances in both technology and in culture. And the Song, not only are they the first to actually use gunpowder, they're the first ones to weaponize it. They also expand foreign trade due to the creation of a special kind of boat called the junk. It's designed for shallow waters. You see the return of Neo-Confucianism. So we know the Tang have the crackdown on Buddhism, but it's the Song that really forced Buddhism to rise back up. And part of that is because of their innovation. The Song also have a specialized production. So much like the Han, they do have government monopolies. Again, salt and iron are very popular things. Everybody buys them. It is a great way to bring in money. There are also private businesses that run through the use of guilds. So essentially, you have certain people, they make one product, prices are set, and it really protects the artisans. You have the production of silk, porcelain, iron goods, steel goods. This is not only done for them, but it's actually made for the purpose of trading. So you actually have people who are making all of these goods for what we would call commercial production. Markets for trade expanded not only due to the specialized production for market goods, but also, again, due to the junks. Because of the massive population growth, you see more markets open up. And you also see the expansion of the Grand Canal. You see the introduction and use of paper money, also called flying money. Their continued accomplishments, so again, the weaponization of gunpowder, as well as new porcelain techniques. So you have translucent porcelain. And what you also see is the invention of a movable type printing press. Yes, I said it, a printing press in 1045 CE. So this is the first time there is a printing press. Now, for the record, the song did not invent movable type. Does anybody know who did? Let's pause and want you to think about that for a minute, but it's not the song. They got the idea by taking movable block letters. That idea was invented in Korea. But under the song, they improve upon this. They make a movable printing press, and what they immediately start doing is mass producing Confucian classics. Now, why do they do this, you ask? Well, here's the thing. Under the song, because we have that rise of Neo-Confucianism, one of the things the song do is they break away from this aristocracy that is run through men passing their jobs down to their sons, or it's a hereditary aristocracy, you could say. So what they do instead is they begin testing on the basis of merit. So if you can sit for the exam, if you can pass the exam, you will get a job that is based upon your skill set, on your level of merit. Now, this sounds great. Anybody can take it. Well, no, they can't, because here's the thing. Even though it is open for anyone to sit for, it takes years and years of studying to master the content, to master the classics of Confucianism, to read through all of these ancient and classical texts and poetries and analects and philosophies and mathematics and poetry. You need to memorize and explain them. And unless that is your full-time job from the age of 6 until you take that test, you are probably not going to pass it. Guys, when people took this test, they were literally living in a very tiny shed, and their families would bring them food, so all they could do was study. And then they took the test. And if you failed that test, that was a massive dishonor on you and your families. There's a lot of pressure riding on this exam. Again, the introduction of paper money, aka flying money. And the reason this is introduced is you have that reintroduction of the Silk Road. Trade is reinvigorated. Paper money is a lot easier to carry than metal coins, such as gold or silver. But there was also a metal scarcity in China. Gold was not a prevalent metal, so they had to do something else. And because iron was used for weapons and steel, it was worthless as a currency. So instead, paper money, the concept of buying things on credit. You also have a lot of naval technology that is being improved and developed, which allows for the expansion of this trade. An improved compass, again, as well as the junk, which you can see here. It is a flat bottom boat that is designed for sailing in shallow waters. What that does, it lets you sail up and down the coast, and it lets you sail up and down the Grand Canal. You also have the stern post rudder and watertight bulkheads, because nobody wants to sink. You also have a regularly, professionally trained military that exists under the song. The skill of smelting iron and making weapons, not only iron weapons, but also steel weapons, and defensive tools and armor. Again, the specialized production, the government monopolies, always a moneymaker. Not always popular, but a moneymaker. All right, changing gears, and we're going to be talking about Korea. So what you see is a unique culture developing from the several small kingdoms that are not united until 668. But these kingdoms are united first by the Silla and then by the Koryo in the early 900s. And that's where the name Korea comes from. And the hereditary elite in Korea absorb Confucianism and Buddhism. And they incorporate those beliefs into their own system. And it is from Korea that they are passed along to Japan. Again, Korea invented woodblock printing, and we know it existed as early as 700. Later, it invents movable type, and they pass that along to China. We're going to spend more time in our later units talking about Korea. Taking a quick look at Japan. So in the mid-7th century, the rulers of Japan implemented a number of political reforms, and they established a very strong centralized government, a legal code, architecture, and city planning. And a lot of that was actually based on what the Tang had set up. But very important to remember that the native religion in Japan is Shinto. And that's going to survive and still be the main religion even after Buddhism comes to Japan. And the form is called Zen Buddhism. What you also see is a very strong difference in the role the emperor plays in China and in Japan. And there is a difference, a very, very large difference between them. So what you're seeing in China is the emperor is in charge. In Japan, you see the development of the shogunate, and this starts with the Fujiwara clan. And it is during this time that the shogunate is essentially running the show. They're the ones in charge, and the emperor is respected. They're an important figure, but it's more of a position of being a figurehead. This period, the Han period, is known for its aesthetic refinement of the aristocracy. You see the elevation of civil officials and government officials above warriors. You also see works of art and novels being written. The Pillow Book is actually believed to be one of the first novels that was written by a woman. And it depicts imperial court women versus Fujiwara shogunate women. And imperial court women lived very public lives. So when I say the imperial court, I'm talking about the family of the emperor. And they have considering the times again, they have quite a bit of freedom. As opposed to the Fujiwara women, they do not. They have very private lives. That separation of the male and female worlds is very defined. By the late 1000s, some warrior clans had become very, very powerful and very, very wealthy. And as we move through, you're going to see a number of different shogunates that rise up and take power in Japan. One of them would be the Kamakura shogunate. And we'll talk more about them in our next unit. Finally, our last slide is on Vietnam. During this time period, Vietnam is not united. It's divided into two different regions. Northern Vietnam is Annam, and they have quite a bit of influence from China, specifically when it comes to religion. And they get that influence from the Tang. They model their elite culture on what the elite Chinese do. In southern Vietnam, you have the Kingdom of Champa, and that's where Champa rice gets its name. You see a lot of influence from Malay and India, as well as a little bit of Chinese culture. And what's very cool is that these cultures will eventually come together and they form something really unique. We also know that the Champa rice was responsible for the population boom, like double the population in China. During the Song period, we know that again that relationship is formed between Champa, which is the south, and then China. Northern Vietnam will actually establish an independent kingdom that they'll rename the Davet. What you will see throughout East Asia is a shared common Confucian interest when it really comes to the hierarchy, when you're looking at relationships, and that can be between genders, that can be between the ruler and the ruled, and different social classes. What you will not see, however, are all of the practices taking place? That is really going to vary based on your location, because what I don't want you to forget is in India, you have Hinduism, and you do see Hinduism and its traditions spreading in South Asia. You also have Buddhism, and that's going to be spreading throughout South, East, and Southeast Asia. You also have other religions that tend to be polytheistic, have a connection with nature. And when these religions come together, you see quite a bit of new formation. All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. That's it for our podcast for this theme. And we'll pick up next week with our new topic. If you have any questions, send me an email. Otherwise, have a great night, y'all. Cheers.